Welcome to the critique.
Today we're looking at a listener submission, and it's a really interesting mix.
It is. It's part studio commentary on things like the SAVE Act and government fraud, and then it cuts to this on-the-ground report from Skid Row.
Right, a real hybrid. And we're just going to dive straight in because I think the two halves are, well, they're kind of fighting each other right now instead of working together.
Okay, so let's start with our first big point. Elevating the rhetoric to expand the audience reach.
Mm-hmm.
The whole piece seems to be about exposing corruption, but the way it's presented, it really limits its own impact by relying on slang instead of just letting the evidence do the work.
Right, and I wonder if we've really thought about the cost of that vocabulary. I mean, in the Nux in our source, he's using terms like retarded, libtard, NPCs.
Yet calling Minnesota a retard state.
Exactly. And look, the weakness there is pretty clear. That language plays great if you're already in the you know?
Sure.
But it just vaporizes your credibility with anyone else. You could be a moderate, a fence-sitter, even just a serious conservative, and you hear that and you just tune out.
You do, and you've got this segment on a $250 million fraud case, feeding our future. That's serious stuff. Wire fraud, money laundering.
It's a huge deal.
But when you sandwich it between all this juvenile name-calling, you reduce a legitimate investigation into like a petty internet flame war.
And doesn't it give the target an easy out? If I'm the attorney general being criticized and the host just calls me a retard, I don't have to engage with the actual facts.
No, you just dismiss him as a crank.
You attack the tone, not the substance. It's an exit ramp for anyone who doesn't want to listen.
Precisely. So the suggestion here is pretty straightforward. You have to elevate the vocabulary to match how serious the accusations are.
Okay.
Frame the critique around things like negligence, malfeasance, administrative failure. You can still be angry, you can still have that energy, but you're sharpening the blade.
So give me a concrete example. He's reacting to that clip of the Minnesota Attorney General being questioned. Instead of mockery, what does he do?
Well, he has the transcript right there on screen. He should just use it. Focus on that specific line where the AG allegedly agrees to, quote, get investigators off the backs of the fraudsters.
Ah, yeah.
He could just say, look at this line. This isn't about being stupid. This is complicity. He agreed to obstruct his own department's investigation. That hits so much harder because it implies legal guilt, not just, a low IQ.
I see another spot for that. The harm reduction part. The needles on the Narcan. He mocks it as, kill yourself, save yourself.
Right, it's a good line. It's visceral, but it's not an argument.
So what's the suggestion?
The concrete suggestion is to replace that mockery with a structured argument about moral hazard.
Okay.
You could say something like, by removing the immediate risk of death without removing the means of addiction, the state is effectively subsidizing a slow suicide. It's still edgy, it's a dark thought, but it has intellectual weight. It makes you think about the policy failure.
Right. It moves it from just being entertainment for people who already agree with you to being like ammunition for a real debate.
That's the perfect way to put it. You have to respect the intelligence of the audience you want, not just the one you already have.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's move to that field reporting. This is our second critique, strengthening the investigative rigor in the field.
Yeah, this part was fascinating, but frustrating.
The reporting from Skid Row, it raises these huge, alarming questions, but it kind of lacks the objective proof to go from being an anecdote to being like irrefutable evidence.
Yeah, let's look at it from a skeptic's perspective. The host is relying completely on his interview subject, Tommy Tomato, and this homeless woman.
Right.
Who claims the food they're getting is expired, and then she goes on to say it's a population reduction plan, and the host just accepts it.
The weakness is that there is zero independent verification on camera. We hear the claim, but we never see the proof. And he uses leading questions like, do you think this is all planned?
Which, of course, prompts the conspiracy answer.
Of course. It makes the whole thing feel biased, maybe even staged, instead of a real discovery. If you want to uncover a scandal, you can't lead the witness.
And if you're standing right there with a camera and someone says the food is expired, your first instinct as a journalist has to be to check it, right?
It has to be. So the suggestion is you have to use real-time verification to make your findings impossible to deny. It has to be visual, not just verbal. In video, if you don't show it, it didn't happen.
So what does that look like in that scene?
It's so simple. A concrete example. The woman says the food's expired. The host should just say, can I see one? Take the package, hold it up to the camera, zoom in on the best by date. If the date is October 2023 and you're filming in February 2024, you've just won. The argument is over. It's a fact, not just her allegation.
That's a great point. But what about that conspiracy stuff? She goes off the rails pretty quick talking about a big plan. That's where the host really loses narrative control.
He does, and he leans into it, which is a mistake. It ties the legitimate finding, the expired food, to this, fringe theory.
So how do you handle that?
The concrete fix is to pivot. Instead of going down that rabbit hole, you push back gently or just pivot back to the observable reality. Say something like, okay, regardless of any big plan, the reality right here, right now, is that you're eating expired food. How does that affect your health? Are you getting sick?
That grounds it. It brings it back from Alex Jones territory to a humanitarian crisis. And it makes it harder for critics to dismiss the whole thing.
Exactly. And there's another moment when the NGO workers show up and get angry at the camera crew. The host asks, "Why are you mad?"
Which goes nowhere, just a shouting match.
Total missed opportunity. A much better way to handle that, a concrete suggestion, is to ask specific policy questions. Ask the worker, what is your protocol for checking expiration dates before you hand this out? Or, can you show us your inventory log?
And when they refuse to answer?
Their silence is way more damning than their anger. It shifts the whole dynamic from you're harassing workers to you're holding an institution accountable.
That's a huge shift. It turns him from an antagonist into an investigator. The goal is to make the footage, courtroom ready.
That's it. Now, this brings us to our third lens. Deconstructing policy versus just mocking the outcomes.
Okay.
The material is good at identifying the symptoms of the homeless industrial complex, but it doesn't really explain the why behind the other side's strategy. So the critique feels a bit surface level.
Right, and I'm not sure the audience even knows what harm reduction is. The material just mocks the safe smoking kits, the needles, pipes, whatever, next to the Narcan, and the host points out the contradiction.
Giving you the drugs and the stuff to save your life.
Yeah. Visually, it's absurd. I get it. But the weakness is that by not explaining the government's stated reason for the policy of harm reduction,
which is about stopping HIV and hepatitis C.
Exactly. By not explaining that, the critique misses the target. It's easy to say, this is crazy, but it's much more powerful to explain why this well-intentioned policy is a catastrophic failure.
If you don't engage with their actual argument, you're just fighting a straw man.
So the suggestion is to steelman. First, you accurately state their argument. Harm reduction is about keeping people alive until they're ready for help. And then you use your own footage to show why it fails in practice.
How would you do that here? What's the concrete example?
Okay, so in the voiceover, you acknowledge the noble goal. These clean needles are meant to stop the spread of disease. Then you immediately cut to your interview with the dealer in the video, the guy who says he's confident in his product and has no plans to ever leave the street.
That's the pivot. The subject himself refutes the policy's goal.
Yes, you use his own words to prove that this safety measure is actually just subsidizing a permanent state of addiction. You can literally say, the state thinks this policy keeps him safe, but as we just heard from the man himself, it actually makes it comfortable for him to never leave.
That is a devastating argument. It shows the safety net has become a spider web.
Exactly. What about the money? He mentions the $24 billion from Gavin Newsom.
Right now, it's just, where did the money go? Which is, a standard complaint.
A bit weak?
Is. To make it stronger, you have to analyze the mechanism. Explain how the money creates an industrial complex. A concrete example. Don't just ask where it went. Explain that the $24 billion pays the salaries of the people handing out the needles.
And the people cleaning the toilets, the NGO admins.
All of it. Explain that if homelessness were to end, all those jobs would end too. That explains the industrial complex much better. It shows the perverse incentive. The solution has become an industry that needs the problem to survive.
That's a much deeper critique. It moves it from just corruption to a structural flaw. And it answers the question of why this never gets fixed.
Because it pays too well not to fix it.
Yeah.
And this thinking connects to so many other parts. Remember the fire on the street corner?
I do. The host was kind of critiquing the fire department for putting it out, which felt off. Fire department should put out a fire.
It was a weak argument. It undermines his logic. So the suggestion is to reframe it. The fire isn't a distraction for the emergency services. It's a direct result of the policy failure.
So not why are you putting this out, but this fire is the inevitable result of letting this happen.
Exactly. A concrete example. Don't blame the firemen. Blame the policy that allows an open-air drug market to operate without fire codes or sanitation. The fire isn't an accident. It's a policy choice. And that links right back to the industrial complex. The chaos justifies justifies the budget.
It all comes back to the incentives.
It does, and that brings us to our fourth and final point, narrative cohesion and thematic threading.
Yeah, this was a big one for me. The whole thing felt disjointed.
It jumps from voter ID to a joke about a coyote to the Minnesota fraud hearing, and then boom, we're on Skid Row. It feels like channel surfing, not a cohesive documentary.
The weakness is there's no clear connective. What does fraud in Minnesota have to do with needles in LA? Other than a general, the left is bad. It feels like two different videos stuck together.
And the ingredients for a connection are all there. The suggestion is to create a unifying thesis statement that connects the macro, the legislation, the fraud, to the micro, the human suffering on the street.
So what's the thread? What's the thing that links them?
I think the strongest one is lack of accountability. You can frame the Minnesota fraud where an AG gets away with helping fraudsters and the Skid Row crisis where $24 billion disappears with no results as two sides of the exact same coin.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's all about money disappearing with zero oversight.
Right. So a concrete example for the transition. When you're moving from the Minnesota segment to Skid Row, the host could say, we just saw how fraud goes unpunished in the halls of power. Now let's go look at the victims of that same lack of accountability on the streets of Los Angeles. When the government refuses to audit itself, the result isn't just lost money, it's human misery.
That's powerful. That turns two separate clips into two chapters of the same story.
It turns a compilation into a narrative. And you can do it again with the voter ID segment. The host kind of hints at this, but he doesn't land the plane.
I think I know where you're going with this. The idea that the underclass is political capital.
Yes. Argue explicitly that the homeless industrial complex you're showing on Skid Row creates the dependent voters that the fraudulent systems in places like Minnesota rely on to stay in power.
So it's a cycle.
It's a cycle of political decay. The lax voting laws keep the corrupt officials in, and the corrupt officials print the money that keeps the dependent class on the street to vote for them. It argues these aren't random clips. It's an ecosystem.
That is a much darker, but a much more cohesive narrative. It changes it from a reaction video into a real political manifesto.
And that is what elevates content. It's about giving your audience a framework to understand the world, not just a reason to be angry at it.
I wonder, though, if the host does all this, the elevated language, the steel manning, the cohesive narrative, does he risk losing his original audience? The ones who were there for the trash talk?
That's always the tension, right? But I'd argue you can keep the tone, the anger, the energy, without using the specific vocabulary that limits your growth. You can be furious about a $250 million fraud without using ableist slurs. You can be shocked by Skid Row without entertaining a population reduction conspiracy. The energy comes from the passion, not the insults.
So it's about refining the weapon, not changing the target.
Precisely. It's about understanding that if you want to expose massive fraud, you need to sound like an investigator, not a troll. You have to build a case that even your enemies are forced to respect, or at least fear.
Okay, so let's recap the main points for our listener.
Let's do it. First, clean up the language. Replace the slurs with precise accusations of negligence, of malfeasance. You'll sound smarter and reach more people.
Second, verify everything in the field. Zoom in on that expiration date. Show the proof. Make it undeniable. Don't let a good find get derailed by a conspiracy theory.
Third, steelman the other side's policies before you destroy them. Explain harm reduction, then use your own footage to show why it's a failure in practice. Win the argument on the merits.
And fourth, thread that narrative. Use the theme of accountability to connect the high-level corruption to the street-level misery. Make it all one story.
If the creator can do that, this content goes from being a niche reaction video to a powerful piece of investigative work that could actually change some minds.
And that seems to be the goal.
Absolutely. We hope this helps. We'd invite the listener to submit their next piece. We'd love to see where this goes.
Keep filming, keep digging, and keep refining that argument.
That's it for this edition of The Critique. We'll see you next time.